Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. It's important not to lose momentum for advancing peace. That's the message from Volodymyr Zelenskyy in the wake of a ceasefire in the Middle East. The Ukrainian president tonight urging leaders to now end the war in Europe. More in just a moment. First, the latest headlines. The Kremlin cracks down on some of its most prominent dissidents. A last-ditch attempt in France to save the country's new government. And the battle for influence in the Arctic heats up. Just a day after Donald Trump was celebrated as peacemaker in the Middle East, all eyes are now turning to Ukraine. Later this week, the US president will again sit down with his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, at the White House, amid hopes that the ceasefire in Gaza drives Trump to ramp up the pressure on Russia and Vladimir Putin. John Todd reports.
Scenes of joy as Palestinian prisoners are released in the West Bank, while Israeli hostages exchanged on Monday under Donald Trump's Gaza peace plan undergo medical tests. Meanwhile, aid trucks arrive in the war-torn territory, where they're swamped by desperate Gazans. Trump told the summit in Egypt that the fighting had stopped for good.
After years of suffering and bloodshed, the war in Gaza is over.
Major obstacles still remain to securing an enduring ceasefire and bringing a wider, more durable peace. As he returned to Washington, Trump declined to offer details on the peace plan's next steps.
We're talking about the rebuilding of Gaza.
What's the road ahead for governing Gaza?
Well, we'll have to see. I mean, a lot of people like the one-state solution. Some people like the two-state solution. So we'll have to see. I haven't commented on that.
On Friday, the US leader is due to meet Ukraine's President Zelenskyy for what some see as a crunch meeting. Kyiv has sent a high-profile team to the US capital, led by Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko, who cemented the Ukraine-US minerals deal, to prepare for the talks. The visit comes after consecutive phone calls between Trump and Zelenskyy on Saturday and Sunday. Trump is mulling the supply of long-range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. Experts say the weapons, which have a range of 2,500 kilometers, could significantly improve Kyiv's position at the negotiating table.
The very fact of the presence of Tomahawks in Ukrainian arsenal will boost Ukrainian chances vis-à-vis Russia, will strengthen Ukraine, will put pressure on Putin to start thinking seriously about peace talks and ceasefire.
Analysts note, though, that Trump has been reluctant to follow through on threats to get tough with Moscow. They suggest Zelenskyy used the momentum of the Gaza peace plan while luring President Trump with the possibility of winning a coveted peace prize to get him on board.
Zelenskyy and the European partners have to maintain that attempt, to be honest with you, to manipulate Trump's ego, to flatter him, to say, yes, you can have the Nobel Peace Prize, because this may not be a question of reaching a deal with Russia. It may be a question of pushing back Vladimir Putin, who is still intent on conquering Ukraine.
Experts say Trump's tough talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would put him in good stead if he chooses to punish Russia.
Both Putin and Netanyahu are incredibly stubborn, and so Trump pushes even further than they do. I mean, Trump's negotiating style is to push so hard that he ends up in a much better situation than he might have been had he just gone through a normal negotiating process.
The coming days will tell whether Trump plans to up the ante in Ukraine and force Putin into peace talks with Kyiv. This is John Todd for TVP World.
Confirmation from the United Nations that 4 of its aid trucks were hit by Russian forces overnight in a breach of international law. The attacks in eastern Ukraine follow Russia's strikes on energy infrastructure, causing blackouts in Ukrainian cities. Let's go live to Kyiv now, where our correspondent Alex Kadier is standing by. Good evening, Alex. So what do we know about these latest attacks, including the apparent targeting of aid workers?
Yeah, good evening, Aaron. Those 4 trucks were traveling the Kherson region, clearly labeled as United Nations trucks from various agencies. They were delivering 800 individual packages of aid for women and girls in that region, particularly targeted by drone warfare, by shelling. The UN saying that this aid is essential for people in that region who are unable to relocate because the fighting is so fierce around them. We understand that 2 of those trucks were heavily damaged by Russian FPV drones in that attack. 2 were spared, but nevertheless an aid convoy, according to the UN, targeted by the Russian armed forces in breach, of course, of international law. It was described as a brutal breach of international law by Andriy Sybiha, the foreign minister of Ukraine. Clearly a cause for concern for aid workers, particularly in the region of Kherson, where we have seen what is called the human safari of Russian drones targeting civilians in their cars, walking in the streets, indiscriminately targeting civilians and military alike. So certainly a cause for concern for humanitarians working across this country, particularly at the time where Russian strikes have neutralized part of this country's energy infrastructure. We've seen 30,000 people in the second largest city of Kharkiv without power. A medical facility there also struck in these Russian attacks. Just 4 days ago here in Kyiv, there were rolling blackouts and water shortages because of strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, as we have seen for several winters now. Russia trying to freeze out Ukrainians ahead of a cold winter, certainly bringing urgency to that meeting later this week in Washington, Aaron.
Now, Alex, we're also hearing tonight that the mayor of Ukraine's 3rd largest city has been stripped of his citizenship. Do we know more?
Yeah, Hennady Trukhanov, who's the mayor of Odessa, has been stripped of his citizenship by President Zelenskyy, accused of having a second nationality, a Russian passport. Now, Ukrainian officials are not allowed to hold dual nationality, and the security service of Ukraine, the SBU, confirming publicly with a photocopy of a Russian passport for Mr. Trukhanov, confirming that he holds dual nationality and that he had been stripped of his Ukrainian nationality. Now, Mayor Trukhanov of Odessa has said he will contest this decision in court, but President Zelenskyy very clear that this move, stripping his Ukrainian citizenship, would mean he is no longer the mayor of Odessa. This was the explanation by the Ukrainian president.
Odessa deserves greater protection and greater support. This can be achieved in the format of military administration. For far too long, too many security issues in Odessa have remained without an adequate response.
And previously in that statement, President Zelenskyy said he met with the head of the security service, saying that more needs to be done against Russian agents. Perhaps an accusation, perhaps an implication that Mayor Trukhanov had a lot more to answer for. We know that he has taken positions that are outside of the political mainstream in Ukraine, for example, opposing the tearing down of a statue of Catherine the Great in that city of Odessa. But as we heard from President Zelenskyy, who's planning to install a new military city administration in Odessa, it would make that city's operations under the president's direct control instead of the elected mayor of Odessa. So some very damning allegations against that mayor of Odessa, prompting this dramatic measure to strip him of his citizenship and take military control of the city. Aaron.
Alex Kadia in Kyiv, thank you. The Kremlin has opened a criminal case against some of its most prominent critics, including exiled Russian businessman Mikhail Khodorkovsky. Moscow's Federal Security Service says it is investigating all 22 members of the Russian Anti-War Committee, accusing them of plotting to violently seize power. Anastasia Yanchenko explains.
A probe has been launched into an alleged violent power grab and involvement in a terrorist organization. These are the accusations from Russia's Federal Security Service against exiled Kremlin critic Mikhail Khodorkovsky and 21 other members of the Anti-War Committee of Russia.
The crackdown on Russian opposition, the crackdown on any political figure started for Putin from Mikhail Khodorkovsky. Mikhail Khodorkovsky already has been in prison for 10 years in Russia. And Mikhail Khodorkovsky is one of the prominent voices outside of Russia right now.
The Federal Security Service of Russia is prosecuting opposition members who supported the declaration of the Russian Democratic Forces, which calls for the elimination of the current Russian government. The declaration labels the war in Ukraine a crime, declares Putin's regime illegitimate, and demands the release of prisoners as well as the restoration of Russia's internationally recognized borders. Another reason for the persecution was the creation of the platform of Russian Democratic Forces at the EU Council earlier this month. It was intended as a forum for sharing ideas and supporting democratic forces. In short, uniting the opposition, a move the Kremlin fears.
Russia will be represented in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, but it will not be the Kremlin, not the Russia governed by Putin. It will be a different Russia. Anti-Putin, anti-war, peaceful, the true European Russia.
Among the accused is also Vladimir Kara-Murza, who took part in last year's major political prisoner exchange between Russia and Western countries. He had been previously arrested for his anti-war stance on Ukraine.
To the Putin regime.
Speaking exclusively to TVP World, he called Russia a dictatorship.
From the imperfect democracy that it was back in the 1990s to the perfect dictatorship that it is today. We have more political prisoners in Russia alone today than there were in the whole of the Soviet Union.
The United Nations reports that at least 2,000 people are imprisoned, and repression continues as Russia falls further into authoritarianism. The question now is, what will Russia be without Putin?
Russia likely won't become a true part of modern Europe anytime soon. But it could become a country that is a sister civilization to Europe, something in between Europe and Asia, something that might resemble Russia more than, say, Turkey does.
For TVP World, Anastasia Yanchenko.
It's been a tumultuous month for Sébastien Lecornu, who became France's shortest-serving Prime Minister when he quit last Monday after just 27 days in office. Now he's back at the wish of President Emmanuel Macron in a last-ditch attempt to save the centrist government from collapse. As Kazimierz Szwyszak reports, the fate of Europe's second-largest economy is hanging in the balance.
This is Sébastien Lecornu's second and final chance to push through a budget bill for 2026, one which won't get voted down in the French Parliament. He faces the gargantuan task of cutting France's widening deficit.
We cannot place our country in a state of lasting dependence on foreign lenders, and I will not be the Prime Minister of a public finance slippage. Therefore, by 2025, we will have met the 5.4% deficit forecasted by my predecessor.
All under heavy criticism from both the far left and the far right.
Since we can no longer do anything about the current deadlock, it is better, on the contrary, to see it as a great opportunity, the opportunity to use our votes in an early presidential election.
I find this spectacle deplorable. I say this with great calm and serenity, but I believe I am expressing the opinion of millions of French people.
Just last week, Lecornu resigned from his position as Prime Minister after serving a record short time in office, less than a month.
Merci à toutes et à tous. Je vous remercie.
As his minority government failed to gather the support of other political parties in Parliament, he felt there was no choice but to step down. But he has since returned to office after a plea from President Emmanuel Macron. In an attempt to gather political support for his budget bill, Lecornu announced on Tuesday the suspension of Macron's flagship project, the pension reform.
I will propose to Parliament this fall that we suspend the 2023 pension reform until the presidential election of 2027. No increase in the retirement age will take place from now until January 2028.
The question is, will that be enough to convince the undecided socialists to back the new budget? Lecornu certainly can't count on the support of the far left and the far right, as both called for a no-confidence vote to take place on Thursday. If the vote is successful, President Macron will most likely call for snap parliamentary elections.
President Macron noted the two motions of no confidence had been tabled, that some people therefore did not want to debate. He reiterated that the motions were motions of dissolution and should be viewed as such.
As France is dealing with one of the worst political crises in decades, Europe will be watching Thursday's vote with bated breath. The stability of the continent's second-largest economy, or lack thereof, has repercussions for the stability of the euro and the entire economy of the European Union.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk insists Warsaw will not accept any migrants as part of a proposed overhaul of the European Union's relocation rules. For more on this story, I'm joined live by EU correspondent Angela Skujins from Brussels. Good evening, Angela. So how is this position landing with leaders in the Belgian capital?
Good evening, Aaron. So it shouldn't come as much as a surprise as the battle for migration is not a new one. We've had various politicians from Poland, from across the political aisle, reinstate telling officials in Brussels that they will not adopt the EU's overhauled migration and asylum rules, particularly when it comes to relocating migrants and asylums. Now, this sits at the core of those rules, which are expected to kick in from June next year. It's part of burden sharing, aiming to alleviate the stress that some European countries face when it comes to accommodating migrants. We're thinking about Italy and Greece in particular compared to others. Late last week, the Polish President Karol Nawrocki told European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen that they would not accommodate new arrivals as part of this relocation. This was reiterated by the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk in the city of Racibórz today, underlining that in no circumstances would they accommodate these new arrivals.
As long as I am in charge of the government in Poland, whatever form the next stages of the migration pact take, Poland has its methods and will not accept any migrants under the relocation mechanism, not a single migrant. As far as we're concerned, this matter is closed.
But the tension over migration was also felt in Luxembourg. We saw interior ministers meeting there for talks on how this migration and asylum pact would function. It's important to point out the European Commission today was meant to publish a report outlining how many migrants and asylum seekers each European country would accept. The European Commissioner for Migration, Magnus Brunner, was grilled about this, particularly when it comes to those comments from the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. He admitted there are details that still need to be ironed out, but rebuffed questions and claimed that proposal was dead upon arrival.
It's the first time we do this exercise, and I think we have to get it right, and that's why I don't think it's too important whether it's some days more or less.
Now, the real reason that Poland is kicking up such a fuss regarding this is that we heard the Interior Minister Marcin Kierwiński stating earlier this morning in Luxembourg to those ministers that the Central European country is already managing and accommodating up to 2 million Ukrainian refugees displaced because of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. They are also shoring up Europe's eastern flank, that border there, from weaponized migration, hybrid threats. This is exactly why the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk says Poland is doing everything that it can do. But certainly these border clashes between Warsaw and Brussels are far from over. Hopefully we will find a conclusion before next summer, Aaron.
That's Angela Skujins from Brussels. Thank you. Staying with the EU, and countries across the bloc are rolling out a new entry and exit system at its external borders. The automated process will electronically register the data of non-EU nationals, with travellers scanning their passports and fingerprints on the way through. As Randy Potts explains, it's designed to easily detect overstayers and prevent illegal migration.
The EU's new EES, or entry-exit system, will affect all non-European citizens, including British visitors, and requires new personal information, including fingerprints and facial imaging. All EU nations are affected except for Ireland, Cyprus, Iceland, Norway, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein.
This is a digital travel system that's being put in place to make travel much smoother for entry and exit, but also more secure by keeping everyone's information to make sure there's no criminal activity and there's no breaches of security going into the EU.
The new electronic system will remove the requirement to manually stamp passports at the EU's external borders, using digital records instead. One primary focus of the new rule is monitoring whether people who are traveling to the bloc without a visa are sticking to its up to 90-day stay within any 180-day period rule. On departure from the bloc, travelers' details will be checked against the EES database to confirm compliance. Subsequent journeys will only require facial biometric verification.
And customers will go to a kiosk, they will scan their passports, scan their fingerprints, scan their facial biometrics, 4 questions, and then they can go straight through the check-in and passport control.
There is even more change coming next year when non-Schengen area citizens will need to apply for an ETIAS authorization and pay a €20 fee to be able to enter the European Union. For TVP World, Randy Potts.
As the ice melts in the Arctic due to climate change, the battle for influence in the region is heating up. A pilot container service is reducing the connection time between China and Europe to just 20 days by sailing along the northern coast of Russia. But with new commercial opportunities also comes chilling risks. Natalia Oriol reports.
The Arctic, a polar region in the high north where only the most resilient can thrive. However, climate change is opening routes through the region that once were only a distant possibility. A container ship has crossed the Arctic via the Northern Sea Route connecting China and Europe in just 20 days to deliver goods ahead of Christmas. The ship, Istanbul Bridge, is on its way to make last call in Gdańsk on October 18th. The Northern Sea Route runs from the Bering Sea to the Barents Sea along the coast of Russia. The Suez Canal used to be the first passage of choice for maritime traffic. However, after the war in Gaza spilled over to the Middle East, alternatives became more attractive. The Arctic Path is one such alternative. However, not only commercial services might navigate the cracks in the polar ice.
We'll see more of the Russian Shadow Fleet vessels moving across the Russian Arctic, and we'll see other routes to overcome technology export controls restrictions that have been placed on the Russian Federation after its full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Moscow appears to be in pole position in the global Arctic race, as alongside a geographical foothold, it operates the world's largest icebreaker fleet, estimated at over 40 vessels. One of these ships was already involved in an incident in October 2023, which some have called a sabotage operation.
Chinese flagged vessel, the Nunu Polar Bear, which of course had both Chinese and Russian ownership associated with it, dragged its anchor for something like 200 nautical miles through the central Baltic Sea and then into the Gulf of Finland, destroying this infrastructure. Who was there with it? The Sevmorput, this Russian nuclear-class icebreaker.
Meanwhile, the U.S. is eyeing a stronger foothold in the Arctic.
President Trump this past summer, this massive bill that he put forward would give more than $8.6 billion to increase the Coast Guard, not the Navy, but the U.S. Coast Guard's icebreaker fleet in the Arctic. And that is done with the high hopes of countering rising Chinese and Russian influence.
The U.S. is set to acquire up to 11 ships after striking a deal with Finland, an industry powerhouse that has designed 80% of the world's icebreakers.
We definitely see the Arctic in the north as a region of geopolitical competition.
As a shorter ice cover makes the Arctic more viable amid geopolitical tensions, questions arise about future power plays in the race to make the polar region a stronghold.
Returning now to Ukraine and what could happen next after a peace deal in the Middle East. Joining me for more is Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy says it's important not to lose momentum for peace. As we sit here today, is there tangible momentum for Ukraine, or does this Gaza peace deal just leave Kyiv in the same position as before?
Well, it does and it doesn't. What I find interesting is that what Trump did to accomplish a peace deal between Israel and Gaza was kind of what he's been about in terms of solving the Russia-Ukraine. But, you know, he for instance, he essentially said to Benjamin Netanyahu, you don't have any cards, which is, he didn't use that framework, but this is kind of behind the scenes what he did to him, and said, you don't have the cards. You know, you can't keep this war. You may be beating Hamas, but you can never win this war, and that sort of thing. And so that, I think, helped push the Israeli side towards saying, well, we're doing okay, but we can't. He also sort of chastised them for their techniques and their tactics, saying that you may be winning the ground war, but you're losing public opinion because so many civilians are dying. So there are some parallels, but, obviously Israel is not Ukraine and vice versa. And any attempt he's made, to line up Ukraine to be more willing to capitulate hasn't worked. And in fact, Ukraine has turned around and proven that it has cards, and it's bombing the heck out of the oil facilities in Russia, thank goodness. So there is parallel, but his next big challenge is going to be trying to stop the war in Ukraine. And there's no question that he's not going to run from that. I mean, he will take up that challenge, and now it'll be very different.
So you're confident that President Trump will not let Ukraine lay low, if you like, now? He will want to end that war?
He definitely wants to end the war. Everybody wants to end wars. And, it's interesting that, the only sort of crack in Putin's armor has been the fact that Trump's wife sent a personal letter to Putin about how he's kidnapped all these thousands of Ukrainian children. And a few of the children have dribbled back. It's a big blow to any kind of justification that Putin likes to tell the world he has in terms of what he's doing to Ukraine. The other thing, of course, has changed, and it does also affect Poland dramatically, is, his constant attacks over Europe. I mean, he's already started the war against Europe, but the Europeans don't want to call it that.
Now, of course, President Zelenskyy is meeting with Donald Trump at the White House on Friday. Trump also telling us this week that, quote, it's time to get Russia done. So in line with your comments just a few moments ago, what are you expecting from that meeting? I mean, are we looking at concrete steps, this idea of tomahawks given to Kyiv to launch into Russia, or will it just be handshakes and promises?
Well, I think the tomahawks, he's dangling that as a pressure point. Germany has long-range missiles too, and they're not doing it. I mean, there is this concern because, unlike Gaza, you're not dealing with some terrorist group that's funded by somebody. He has nuclear weapons, and he pulls out the nuclear threat every time the Tomahawk missiles are mentioned. Although it's kind of silly because the Americans are indirectly attacking Russia anyway through Ukraine by giving all their help. But I think that he will, in fact, and he said recently, he hasn't made up his mind yet, but he is definitely seriously considering unleashing the Tomahawk attacks and giving them to the Ukrainians. And I think he's going to do some other pressure points. I think he's going to hopefully get involved in sanctions. And remember, he's also been chastising the Europeans who are still buying Russian oil and natural gas. And so he should. And in actual fact, I think he should slap tariffs on Hungary and on Slovakia for taking Russian stuff, and any other European countries that are. And so he's going to get tough now. This will be a focus, and he's got his wife behind him, saying, but the children, it's such a hideous regime. It's doing some horrible things. So I hope that this will make a big difference, and that Ukraine will have more weaponry and a louder voice, and Russia will be challenged with enormous sanctions by the Americans.
So you're saying Donald Trump likely to get tough now. I mean, is there a case for Vladimir Putin to be nervous now that Washington has also seemingly ticked off the Middle East and Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Well, that's next on Donald Trump's focus list.
Nothing makes Putin nervous. Putin is a zealot. He's crazy. He's on a mission. He thinks Ukraine belongs to him, and he doesn't care how many soldiers die. He doesn't face electoral rejection. He controls all the oligarchs. He controls the economy. He controls the government. He has nothing internally to be frightened of, unless someone tries to kill him and is capable of doing it. I mean, that is always but I'm sure he's got guards all over the place. So he's not frightened. He's just waiting for the next move. What is going to be Donald Trump's chess move? And I think Donald's chess move has to be no more nice guy, no more he's my friend, no more he was my friend. Now it's got to be he's a monster, he steals children, kick him out of the UN, and really go, and then the sanctions. And he's going to have to do that. I just don't see any way around it. He tried to be nice, but, Putin kicked him in the teeth and embarrassed him.
Now, we're running out of time, but briefly, how much does this talk of the Nobel Peace Prize and a potential recognition for Donald Trump, how much does that play into his psyche?
Hey, he has a big ego. He likes to have it stroked. I thought it was a particularly incredible move by the woman from Venezuela who won the Peace Prize, and she dedicated it to peacemakers, the people of Venezuela, and to Donald Trump for his peace efforts. That, to me, was not only classy, but I think valid, because he has been trying. And the other thing that I find is interesting is it certainly means the Americans are probably going to go for regime change in Venezuela.
If the Gaza ceasefire holds, do you think Donald Trump will get that Peace Prize?
I think he would be in the running, but I think that, the ceasefire is just one thing. It's going to be tricky, and it depends on what the other side does, and also the hard line in Israel. But he's softened them up, again, to use the analogy, like Zelenskyy. He went to Netanyahu and said, you don't have the cards. And he said in his speech, look how tiny Israel is. Do you think you can take on the whole neighborhood? Come on, get along with everybody and don't build a fortress. So that's kind of his approach to keep that on track. And I think it will be kept on track. But then there's still the problem of Iran and Russia.
Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, thank you again for your time.
You're welcome.
And that's all for World News Tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.